Okay, this is Wisdom Quotes Part 3, and it's from this book, The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes, written by me, and we're finishing up the appetizer chapter, and after that it'll be in alphabetical order. Okay, so William Blake, the great English artist, poet, he's the guy who wrote Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright. He says, poetry, painting, and music are the three powers in man of conversing with paradise. Yeah, I mean, if I could be born again, I would have, put a lot more time into learning how to draw and how to play a musical instrument. Okay, W. Edwards Deming. Experience by itself teaches nothing. Without theory, experience has no meaning. Without a theory, one has no questions to ask. Hence, without a theory, there is no learning. Okay, and so I would see this as applying to medicine. For a regular doctor, they should be asking themselves, what causes diabetes? What causes hypertension? What causes coronary artery disease? Because then you can work with the theory, see if it matches your experience and that of your patients, and eventually move towards better understanding versus just, show up, mass yielded a pill, send a bill. You don't learn much from that. Okay, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. The main part of intellectual education is not the acquisition of facts, but the learning of how to make the facts live. Yeah, how to use the information. Okay, Aristotle. Intelligence is more than knowledge of a task. Intelligence is also the ability to perform the task. A shipbuilder builds ships. Okay, so the relevance there, I think, is like for looking at high school kids, grade school and high school, they're always taking these Scantron tests. The real world's not like a Scantron multiple choice test. The real world, you have to do stuff. So even though it might be a pain in the butt for the teacher to grade an essay test or something, at least the kid has to write. Plus, we won't even get into education. That's a big subject. Okay, Peter Drucker. He says, knowledge has to be improved, challenged, and increased constantly, or advantages. Yeah, you don't stay the same in your knowledge. You either keep improving it or it starts going down. And the joke in medicine is you become a Gomer doc. Somebody who can get through the day and generate billing codes, but really doesn't know much. Okay, Arthur Koestler. He said, some of the greatest discoveries consist mainly in the clearing away of psychological roadblocks which obstruct the approach to reality, which is why post factum they appear so obvious. Yeah, so you just look at McDougall. The guy's got the guts to sit there and challenge the treatment of coronary artery, the paradigm. Same thing with Caldwell-Esselstyn. So what I'm trying to say is a lot of discovering something in nutrition, health, science, whatever, is being courageous enough to follow the information to its proper conclusion and to say it, even though it makes you unpopular. That's what it takes to figure something out. Here's Craig Venter. He said, moving forward in science is not so much as much unwinding the distorted thinking of the past as it is putting a clearer idea on the table. Yeah, there are major obstacles. For example, if you look at cancer, doctors aren't even allowed to say something else is like a better treatment for cancer than chemo, even if it might be 1,000 times better than the chemo for that. So all these restrictions on what a doctor can say, they help the big, drug company make money, but they do not help the patients. Okay, Brian Tracy. The ability to set goals and make plans for their accomplishment is the master skill of success. Success equals goals. Everything else is commentary. Yeah, you have to focus your energy because you really don't have that much time. And our energy is also limited, our time and our energy. So if you want to achieve something, focus the goal. So I like him. He's the best of the motivational speakers, in my opinion, to get you cheered up and motivated. I really liked his Maximum Achievement CD book. And all his videos are online free. Okay, Albert Einstein. Everything that is really great and inspiring was created by an individual who could labor in freedom. Yeah, great intellectual achievements come from an individual. There's a sort of modern idea, you need some billion-dollar team. Yeah, right. They've spent, I don't know how many hundreds of billions on medical research since the so-called, pursuit of cancer, around 1970 or something, and it's a joke. They've almost achieved nothing, all right? So whereas some guy on his own could read the papers and figure out for himself that the metabolic theory makes a lot more sense than does the somatic mutation theory. But somatic mutation theory is better for selling drugs. Okay, here is Henri Poincaré, so sort of a French name there. It is by logic that we prove, but it is by intuition that we discover. Scientific discovery. or mathematics. Thinking is the process of asking and answering questions. Bertrand Russell, that was Tony Robbins, that last quote. The next one is Bertrand Russell. The greatest challenge to any thinker is stating the problem in a way that will allow a solution. Okay. The other thing is you got to be mentally flexible, because Bertrand Russell said a lot of things that were pretty jerkified, but he also said some things that were brilliant. So, I'm comfortable with dealing with these intellectuals that you can like things they say, but not agree with them on some other major things. Wolfgang Kohler. It would be interesting to inquire how many times essential advances in science have first been made possible by the fact that the boundaries of special disciplines were not respected. Trespassing is one of the most successful techniques in science. Yeah, and that's one of the things too. I said that the person who's the best discoverer, in my experience, is usually a generalist. And the reason is the specialists are locked into their moneymaker, okay? So if you're internal medicine subspecialty, your moneymaker is selling drugs. You're a surgeon, your moneymaker is selling that surgical procedure. So the people from those fields are not going to criticize that, because they would be, exiled by their peers if they did. So it's going to come from somebody else. Okay. Hegel. Truth is found in the emergent synthesis that reconciles the thesis and the antithesis. This is the Hegelian dialectic. Okay, and that's quite often useful. But you also run into the counter argument of, yes or no, like with Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish Socrates. You don't always get to reconcile the two things together. Sometimes you have to choose. Okay, Robert Coram from Boyd. This guy, Boyd, was a genius. Real interesting guy, American fighter pilot, 1950s and 60s. Boyd thought by analogy, a process that his friend, ever the pragmatist, found extremely unsettling. He found it even more unsettling that Boyd was always right. Yeah, I read a couple biographies on him. Colonel John Boyd, he's a really interesting guy. And he used to call his friends like in the middle of the night when he'd have a great idea, and they were pissed off that he'd wake them up at 2 o'clock in the morning, but they loved it that they knew he had been reading for weeks and weeks until he figured something out, a big AO, academic orgasm, and then he would call his friends and talk about it. He didn't seem to have the self-control to wait until the next day. Okay, Douglas Hofstadter and Emmanuel Sander from their book Essences. Analogies are the motor of thought. Yeah, that's how the brain processes cognitive space, is through comparisons. Analogy is like a word for comparison. Arthur Koestler. The real achievement in discoveries is seeing an analogy where no one saw one before. Bertrand Russell. The framing of a hypothesis is the most difficult and most important part of a scientific discovery. Yeah. Okay. John Maxwell. He's sort of the preacher who also writes a lot of self-help books. He says, talk at me and you'll talk alone. Talk to me and I'll listen. Talk about me and I'll listen for hours. Rudyard Kipling, the English poet. If history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. Frank Smith, author of Insult to Intelligence. This is a really good book. He's a really good educator guy. Thought flows in terms of stories. Stories about events, about people, about intentions. And the best teachers are the best storytellers. And that's a good point. Like if you go to thegreatcourses.com, the best professor out of any of the subjects is Rufus Fears. He's an old historian guy. But what's great about it is when he tells a story, he's emotionally into it. So a good teacher not only makes it clear and understandable, they also emotionally help you to connect to the material. Rufus Fears is great at that. Okay, so here now we're going to do a quote from Robert Pirsig, author of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Okay, here we go. Let's see here. If you're going to repair a motorcycle, an adequate supply of gumption is the first and most important tool. If you haven't got that, you might as well gather up all the tools and put them away, because they won't do you any good. Gumption is the psychic gasoline that keeps the whole thing going. If you haven't got it, there's no way the motorcycle can possibly be fixed. But if you have got it and know how to keep it, there's absolutely no way in this whole world that motorcycle can keep from getting fixed. Okay, so there's gumption. And, in another context, you could use the word love. Okay, why do parents often do such incredible things, to help their kids? Because they've got that love, okay? And it's, it reminds me of 1 Corinthians, Paul's speech. like at the Areopagus in Greece, where he said, love is patient, love is kind, love can do all kinds of things. And St. Peter said something similar, love cures a multiple of sins. It heals over a multiple of sins. Okay, the current generation of young men is exposed to high doses of transdermal, transoral estrogens. They often have a cell phone in their front pocket. Maybe that's why they're so unmotivated. Yeah, high estrogenic chemicals in men will lower their motivation level. In young men, high estrogen and low testosterone causes a lack of motivation. Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, thought that men tend to get intellect largely from their mothers and character largely from their fathers. I had wondered why my kids weren't more like me. They were a little bit more like their mother than like me. And I thought to myself, why can't they be more like me? Then I realized that the zygote, when fertilization occurs in her uterus, gets DNA from both parents. But it also gets from the mama, the egg's plasma membrane, its organelles, its cytoplasm, and its mitochondria. Upon first realizing this, I was initially sad. But then I realized if mama is providing 2/3 of the kid's genetic material, then shouldn't she be responsible for 2/3 of the kid's expenses? It has been said that the male vagina is an open wallet. My wife loves to penetrate it. Okay, that's from me. Okay, another Hegel quote. Truth, I already did that one. Okay, here's a good one by Ayn Rand. The truth is only for those who seek it. Yeah, it takes a lot of effort to figure out the truth about a lot of things, so a person has to be motivated if they're ever going to get it. C.S. Lewis, the only people who achieve much are those who want knowledge so badly that they seek it out while the conditions are unfavorable. Favorable conditions never come. And sadly, that's true. I wish I had more time, but it ain't going to happen. It just isn't going to happen. So you got to make do with what you got. Learn how to be more efficient. Oliver Wendell Holmes. To be the master of any branch of knowledge, you must master those which lie next to it. And thus to know anything, you must know all. Yeah, so what that means basically for doctors, you can't just read in your own narrow field. You got to read in other fields. And what you'll be surprised is a lot of the people in other fields haven't read their own fields. I told you that. I went and talked to these endocrinologists. None of them knew anything about diabetes except the drugs. I was amazed by that. Okay, here's a quote by Maxim Gorky. The higher a goal a person pursues, the quicker his ability develops. Yeah, so it's good to have high goals as long as they're reasonable. As long as you've got a reasonable chance to achieve that thing. It's good to have high goals, to want to be the best you can be, but even to want to be the best, whatever your area of competition is, because if you try for that, you'll get farther. Ayn Rand, okay, here's a quote by her. In order to live, a man must act. In order to act, he must make choices. In order to make choices, he must first define a code of values. In order to define a code of values, he must know what he is and where he is. He must know his own nature and the nature of the universe. He needs philosophy. He cannot escape this need. His only alternative is whether the philosophy guiding him is to be chosen by his own mind or by chance. Yeah, that's great. Okay, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Many times the reading of a book has made the fortune of a reader. Yeah, there's a lot of people, if they would just read about hypertension, they could cure their hypertension and not go through all the complications of it. Same thing with their diabetes. Okay, Holbrook Jackson. Education begins by teaching children to read and ends by making most of them hate reading. Yeah, I actually think the public school system is designed to make kids poorly educated and to not want to read or anything. Most people never read another book again after freshman year of high school. They make them read Great Expectorations, Julius Caesar, Mockingbird, and Catcher in the Rye. Those are terrible books, okay? And I mean, for a freshman in high school, they're just not ready for those books. Those books make them miserable. They're almost insulting for a person that age to try to read that. And they get this idea in their mind that reading is just a waste of time and it's painful, rather than it's a great thing that enables you to solve all kinds of problems in your life. Okay, here's a quote by John Holt, a great educator who emphasized homeschooling. He says, if you put a big fat collection of books in the classroom and let the kids choose the books, the test scores go up through the roof. When reading becomes a pleasure and an adventure, kids routinely gain 2 to 3 years of reading skills in 1 year. And so there was a lady who wrote a great book called The Book Whisperer. I don't remember her name at the moment, but it's called The Book Whisperer. You can find it very easily. And so what she did exactly that. She made these bookshelves in her classroom for sixth graders and had tables with all these books stacked up on them and just told the kids, read whatever you want. And all she did was have them give a 5-minute book report after they'd completed the book. And what was extraordinary about it is in the average class, you'd be lucky to get sixth graders to read 3 books in a year as a class, because it's always a miserable obligation when you're forced to read something for a class. Versus when you pick the book yourself, then it's an adventure. You're anticipating what might be in the book. You're making predictions, and then it's fun to see if those predictions come true. It's an adventure. So her kids, what number of books do you think her kids read? Her kids read an average of 42 books a year, sixth graders. And she would let them take the book home, start with the book, sure, bring it home, go ahead, finish it up at home. And all her kids, they were the best students in her class. They were the best students in the school and everything. If you read a lot, you just get good at everything in school. Okay, so that was pretty good. The Book Whisperer. Okay, the difficulty of a gifted child in forming friendships is largely a result of the infrequency of persons who are like-minded. Also, the deep interest in reading, which typifies the gifted child, may further this isolation. I've talked about Hollingsworth, my recent video on the Hollingsworth gap. Okay, Joseph Conrad, don't talk to me of Archimedes' lever. Give me the right word and I will move the world. To persuade, the right word is stronger than the right argument. The power of sound is greater than the power of sense. It's kind of like you basically hypnotize low IQ people if you give them a good slogan. Like you just say the word, good fats, and all these people think they got to eat all this fat food. So that's a perfect slogan for tricking chumps into making themselves fat and sick. Oh, and here's a good one by Wendell Willkie. A good catchword can obscure analysis for 50 years. So good fats was an example of a positive connotation word. So people think, oh, all of a sudden fat is good for you. But you can also do that in terms of having like an insulting slogan. Basically, if you disagree with me, you're a bad person. To impugn a question of motive is a way to block people's access to something. Okay. All right, Ayn Rand. The creator is the man who stands alone. The creator is the man who disagrees. The creator is the man who swims against the current. He is needed for progress. Yeah, so think about that in medicine. If a doctor is nonconformist, he very often gets into trouble, potentially even has his license taken away. But the only way you can improve medicine is to do things different, to be nonconformist. Actually, the only thing that can save medicine is a return to Bible values. I've talked about that before because there's just many thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to be made off drugging people and surgerizing them, and very little to be made off teaching them and empowering them with education about nutrition and toxicology. So the only thing that can make you put the patient's welfare above all that money would be you have to almost like love the patient. You have to put them on a pedestal as being partly divine as well as part beast. Otherwise, why, for just a talking primate, which is the modern definition of a human with no soul, and atheistic Darwinism, and our medical system runs on that, then why should you have any obligation to them, beyond the standard of care, which is designed to make money for the drug companies? Okay, that's what I'm saying. Like, people laugh at me for saying that, but I've been a doctor 30 years. I know that that's exactly true. It's not even ambiguous. It's 100% completely obviously true. Arthur Herman, the fate of Socrates proved to Plato that true knowledge lay permanently beyond the reach of the masses. Okay, Arthur Herman from The Light in the Cage, best philosophy book ever written. Here's one from Julien Lemaitre. For a wise man, it is not enough to study nature and truth. He must proclaim it for the few who are able to think. The rest can't reach the truth any more than frogs can fly. Okay, there's not many people that really want the truth about things, but, they really should, because, they get terribly sick and they don't make much of an effort. I actually just heard a good Hippocrates quote recently. Hippocrates basically said, if somebody says they want to get better, the first question to ask them is, are you willing to do all the things that are necessary to get better? And unless they agree to that, then it's kind of a waste of time. It's kind of a big joke. Claude Helvetius. It is the strong passions that give us the continuous attention needed for great intellectual efforts. Yeah, you got to get yourself excited about a subject. And I would tell that to students because I sometimes tutor, college students and grad students. And I would go through all this philosophical stuff about how you get psyched up for school and you see it as part of your future, your destiny and whatnot. And a lot of them say to me, like, why are you doing that? Some people are smart and some aren't. Why are you going into all this stuff? And I'm like, no, no, no. Your brain only remembers what it thinks is important. So you have to convince your brain that learning this material is part of your future, your destiny, and thus is important. Otherwise, you'll have a harder time remembering it. Plus, that makes school a lot more fun. Warren Bennis, IQ is a threshold competence. You need it, but it doesn't make you a star. Emotional intelligence can make you a star. So I guess you need a certain amount of cognitive horsepower, if you will, to do certain different things. But to be really good at them, you need a lot more than just that. Norbert Wiener. The machine is the equivalent of slave labor. Any labor that competes with slave labor must accept the economic consequences of slave labor. Okay, so yeah, we're not going to win financially competing with a machine. Sometimes you can defeat the machine, though, because the machines tend to be very narrow in what they can do. And in medicine, for example, they'll have a machine that can read an EKG, but they want a cardiologist's name or an internal medicine doctor's name assigned to it so they can sue them. So they kept it on there. Okay, here's a quote from Ray Bradbury. He's a pretty good writer. I think Fahrenheit 451 was his best book. Digression is the soul of wit. Take digression from Hamlet, and what have you got? Okay, Charles Darwin. A monkey, after getting drunk on brandy, would never touch it again. And thus, the monkey is much wiser than most men. Okay, how does he know that about monkeys? Gabriel Cousins. If you eat the right food, you don't need a doctor. If you eat the wrong food, no doctor can help you. That's sort of like an Oliver Wilde type chiasmus where the sentence turns back on itself. Chiasmus means X, and so it like goes one way then comes right back the other way. It's a very memorable way to talk. Winston Churchill, there is nothing like oratory. It can make a commoner a king. And that's a cool statement in the sense that, most people, they come up from the proles. And oratory is something that could give them a lot more bargaining power. And I've seen it in real life. People that can write and speak effectively, they're less likely to get harassed and messed with because they can fight back. They can articulate themselves effectively. They can write a good letter. They can describe what happened so someone else listening will see their point of view and thus, they'll get the benefit of the doubt. Okay, Ian Fleming. All the greatest men are maniacs. They are possessed by a mania which drives them forward towards their goal. The great scientists, philosophers, religious leaders, all maniacs. What else but blind singleness of purpose could have kept them in the groove of purpose? Mania. It is as priceless as genius. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I've seen some great athletes and great scholars, and they usually are real obsessed with achievement, discovery in their domain. And you have to be kind of wired, pumped up, and excited, because how do you generate the energy to do so much work? Because it takes a ton more work to make a discovery than to just simply follow the paradigm and do routine stuff. And that's a common theme. I spent a long time studying the lives of numerous geniuses, as many as I could, and that came out over and over again. They just have this monomaniacal, intense desire to complete the task in their field, whatever that might be. Like for Bach would write all these incredible compositions very rapidly. Same thing with Mozart, okay, under the worst of conditions. Mozart would say, I am immersed in music all day long. Okay, Will Durant, the great historian, American historian, the best a man can do is to learn about the good things in civilization and try to transmit this to the next generation. Will Durant, if a man is fortunate, he will before he dies gather up as much as he can of his civilized heritage and transmit it to his children. And to his final breath he will be grateful for this inexhaustible legacy, knowing that it is our nourishing mother and our lasting life. Will Durant. Yeah, he had also said civilization isn't inherited, it has to be passed on through education. And if a generation loses it, then they revert to becoming barbarians. Okay, Theodore Dalrymple, the English writer, he says, The British are barbarians camped out in the relics of an older and superior civilization to whose beauties they are oblivious. And I actually think that the younger generation isn't so much oblivious to the beauties of Western civilization and Christianity. I think they're just ignorant of it. They don't know about it. But once they see it, then they can appreciate it. And I think they need to see it, because you don't want to, be an Esau and trade your birthright for a bunch of lousy modern processed junk. Okay, Will Durant continues. All of Western civilization is dying because it has lost the religious basis of its moral code. We are living in a post-Christian era. Civilizations begin with religion and stoicism, but then they end with unbelief and undisciplined pursuit of individual pleasure. A civilization is born stoic, and it dies Epicurean. Yeah, talk about America being in that phase. You need religion. You need religion way more than you realize. Society needs it. You can't have a successful society without religion. And if you think you can, you really haven't studied that much history. Okay, so anyways, that's it for this chapter. I hope that was interesting for you. And by the way, if you like any of the quotes, just hit the print screen button and you can save the quote. You could write it down, but that's a quick way to save them. Put them into a quote folder, and then you can make your own collection of quotes. Do whatever you want with them, but that's an easy way to acquire them.